The people who laugh the loudest are often the least prepared for the truth. Ryan Carter thought he had already erased Claire Bennett from his life. To him, she was nothing more than a forgotten chapter, a woman he had once loved but eventually outgrown, someone he believed would spend the rest of her life quietly carrying the weight of his rejection. So when he spotted her standing alone at the city's most exclusive charity gala, dressed with quiet elegance instead of luxury, he couldn't resist one last cruel performance. Surrounded by business partners, socialites, and cameras, Ryan let a mocking smile spread across his face before asking loudly if life had finally taught her what it meant to lose everything. Laughter rippled through the crowd as curious eyes turned toward Claire, waiting to see the broken woman everyone expected. But Claire never lowered her head. She never argued. She never begged for respect. Instead, she looked at Ryan with a calm expression that unsettled him more than any angry response ever could. For just a moment, it felt as though she already knew something he didn't. Ryan mistook that silence for defeat. He had no idea it was confidence. Then the atmosphere shifted. Conversations faded. Smiles disappeared. A quiet wave of recognition spread across the ballroom as one of the most influential men in America walked through the entrance. CEOs who had ignored everyone else immediately stepped aside. Investors straightened their jackets. Even the event organizers suddenly looked nervous. Ryan felt a flicker of excitement. This was the man he had spent months trying to impress, the powerful executive whose signature could transform his company overnight. He watched the distinguished gentleman cross the room with calm, deliberate steps, expecting him to stop among the city's elite. Instead, the man walked past every millionaire, every executive, every celebrity, until he came to a stop beside Claire. Without hesitation, he smiled warmly, placed a protective hand near her shoulder, and greeted her as though she were the most important person in the room. The color drained from Ryan's face. His heartbeat slowed for one impossible second as a terrifying question echoed through his mind. Who was really standing behind the woman he had spent years convincing himself was nothing? The answer would cost him far more than his pride. Claire Bennett never believed that love had to be loud to be real. She believed it was found in ordinary mornings, shared coffee before work, handwritten grocery lists on the refrigerator, and quiet conversations after long days. When she married Ryan Carter 8 years earlier, she thought they wanted the same future. Back then, Ryan was ambitious but kind. He laughed easily, remembered birthdays, called his parents every Sunday, and spent countless evenings dreaming with Claire about building a life that mattered more than expensive cars or impressive titles. They rented a small apartment on the west side of Chicago, where the heating system made strange noises every winter and the kitchen was barely large enough for 2 people to cook together. Yet Claire often said it was the happiest place she had ever lived because it was filled with hope instead of luxury. Ryan agreed. At least he used to. As the years passed, opportunities arrived faster than either of them expected. Ryan joined a growing real estate investment firm, and his talent for closing difficult deals quickly caught the attention of executives. Promotions followed. The modest apartment became a downtown condominium with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Weekend road trips turned into first-class flights to New York, Miami, and Aspen. Business dinners replaced quiet evenings at home. Success slowly rewrote the rhythm of their marriage, so gradually that Claire hardly noticed it happening. At first, Ryan apologized every time work interrupted dinner. Then the apologies became shorter. Eventually, they disappeared altogether. He began measuring people by the size of their bank accounts, the neighborhoods they lived in, and the names they could introduce at exclusive events. Every conversation became another calculation. Every friendship became another opportunity. Claire watched the man she loved become someone who believed that worth could be listed on a financial statement. She tried to remind him of the life they had once dreamed about, but Ryan only smiled politely before returning another business call. He often told her that the world respected winners and ignored everyone else. Claire quietly disagreed. She believed respect was earned by character, not status. Their different beliefs slowly became invisible walls inside their home. Ryan wanted Claire to become someone different as well. He encouraged her to wear designer labels she never cared about, memorize the names of influential investors, and speak more confidently during charity galas, not because he wanted her to enjoy those events, but because he wanted her to fit the image of the executive wife he imagined standing beside him. Claire tried. She truly did. She attended dinners she never enjoyed, smiled through conversations that felt empty, and listened patiently while strangers discussed luxury watches longer than they discussed their own families. Every time she returned home, she quietly changed into comfortable clothes and made herself tea, wondering why pretending to be someone else had become the price of supporting the man she loved. The first time Ryan called her an embarrassment, he apologized before sunrise. He blamed stress, exhaustion, and impossible deadlines. Claire accepted the apology because she remembered the man he used to be. The second time, he blamed pressure again. By the third time, he did not apologize at all. Instead, he asked why she always took everything so personally. Those words stayed with Claire far longer than he ever realized. She stopped sharing her worries because she no longer believed he wanted to hear them. She celebrated his achievements even when he forgot hers. She stood beside him through every success while quietly disappearing from the center of her own life. The people around Ryan noticed only his rising career. Almost no one noticed the woman making silent sacrifices behind every polished public appearance. Claire never asked for recognition. She only wanted the man she married to remember who they had once been. She did not know that Ryan had already decided the future had no room for the past. The distance between Ryan and Claire did not begin with a dramatic argument. It grew through 1,000 small disappointments that quietly settled into their everyday lives. Ryan stopped asking how her day had been because he assumed nothing interesting could have happened. Claire stopped waiting for him to come home for dinner because she already knew another client meeting would keep him away. Their conversations became schedules instead of dreams, reminders instead of laughter, and silence instead of understanding. Then came the invitation that changed everything. Ryan's company was hosting an exclusive networking reception at one of the most prestigious hotels in Chicago. Investors from New York, developers from California, and influential business leaders from across the country would all be there. Ryan insisted Claire attend because appearances mattered. He carefully selected an expensive dress for her, explained which executives deserved the most attention, and reminded her several times not to discuss anything that might make him look ordinary. Claire smiled politely and agreed, although she felt more like another accessory than a partner. Throughout the evening, she watched Ryan transform into someone almost impossible to recognize. His confidence became arrogance. His ambition became obsession. He laughed louder whenever wealthy guests were nearby and barely acknowledged employees who served the event. Claire found herself speaking with one of the hotel staff members, an older woman who seemed overwhelmed by the busy evening. The woman accidentally dropped a tray of glasses, and several guests immediately stepped away in annoyance. Without hesitation, Claire knelt beside her, helped gather the broken pieces safely, and assured the embarrassed employee that accidents happen to everyone. Ryan noticed from across the ballroom. Instead of seeing kindness, he saw humiliation. Later that night, while driving home beneath the glowing city lights, he asked why she had chosen to make herself look like part of the hotel staff instead of mingling with investors. Claire answered softly that treating people with dignity had never damaged anyone's reputation. Ryan tightened his grip on the steering wheel and replied that successful people understood priorities. Claire looked out the window, realizing they were no longer speaking the same language. The weeks that followed became colder. Ryan spent more time traveling, more time attending private dinners, and more time posting carefully crafted photographs that portrayed a perfect life. Claire appeared in fewer and fewer of those pictures until she disappeared from them entirely. Friends who had once visited regularly now seemed closer to Ryan than to her. Invitations stopped arriving. Phone calls became rare. The loneliness was subtle but unmistakable. One rainy afternoon, Claire visited Ryan at his office with homemade soup after hearing that he had been working through another exhausting week. She waited quietly in the reception area until a conference room door opened. Ryan walked out laughing beside several executives and an elegant woman named Vanessa Brooks, a successful marketing consultant who had recently joined several of his projects. Claire noticed how naturally Vanessa matched Ryan's polished image. Before Claire could even wave, Ryan's smile faded. Instead of introducing his wife with pride, he looked uncomfortable. He accepted the container of soup without warmth and quickly explained to everyone that Claire was simply stopping by on an errand. The words landed harder than he intended. Simply stopping by. as though the woman who had shared every step of his journey had become an interruption. Claire forced a smile, wished everyone a pleasant afternoon, and left before anyone could see the tears gathering in her eyes. She never mentioned that moment again, but something inside her quietly changed. For the first time since their marriage began, she wondered whether she was mourning a relationship that had already ended long before either of them admitted it. Ryan never realized that the greatest losses rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary days, until one morning there is nothing left to save. The divorce papers arrived on a bright Monday morning, delivered in an envelope so ordinary that Claire almost smiled when she first picked it up. She had spent the previous weekend planting flowers on the small balcony outside their condominium, believing that maybe, just maybe, the difficult season they had been living through would finally begin to pass. Instead, she found page after page filled with legal language that reduced 8 years of marriage to signatures, financial disclosures, and carefully numbered paragraphs. Ryan did not come home to explain anything. He called that evening from New York, saying his attorney had already discussed every important detail and that making the process emotional would only make it more difficult for both of them. Claire listened quietly while staring at the wedding photograph still hanging above the fireplace. It showed two people smiling with complete confidence that they would grow old together. She wondered when those strangers had disappeared. The following weeks became a lesson in letting go. Claire packed books they had collected during road trips, framed photographs from anniversaries, and handwritten birthday cards that Ryan had once filled with promises about forever. Every object carried a memory, yet every memory now felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Friends she believed would remain close slowly drifted toward Ryan. Some avoided choosing sides. Others quietly assumed that a successful businessman must have had good reasons for ending the marriage. Claire did not defend herself. She knew that people often preferred simple stories over complicated truths. She rented a modest apartment in a peaceful neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. The building was older, the furniture was simple, and the view overlooked a small community park instead of the city's famous skyline. For the first time in years, silence no longer felt uncomfortable. She began volunteering twice a week at a neighborhood literacy center, helping adults improve their reading skills and assisting children with homework after school. None of the families there knew anything about her past. They only knew Claire as the woman who always remembered every child's favorite book and never rushed anyone who struggled to learn. Slowly, the emptiness inside her heart made room for purpose again. Meanwhile, Ryan's life appeared perfect from the outside. Business magazines praised his rapid success. Industry websites published photographs of him speaking at conferences beside nationally recognized developers. His social media accounts filled with elegant dinners, luxury hotels, and carefully staged celebrations. Vanessa Brooks appeared beside him more frequently, smiling with effortless confidence as comments praised them as an impressive power couple. Claire occasionally saw those photographs without searching for them. Mutual acquaintances shared them. News articles recommended them. Algorithms seemed determined to remind her that Ryan had moved forward without looking back. Each time she closed the screen, took a slow breath, and reminded herself that photographs could never capture peace of mind. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted across the sidewalks outside the literacy center, Claire noticed a distinguished gentleman sitting quietly in the waiting area. He looked to be in his late 40s, dressed simply despite carrying himself with unusual confidence. While most visitors checked their phones, he spent nearly an hour reading with a shy 12-year-old boy who had been afraid to practice aloud in front of strangers. When the session ended, the boy left smiling more broadly than Claire had ever seen. Curious, she thanked the gentleman for his kindness. He returned the smile and introduced himself only as Nathaniel. He said he occasionally volunteered whenever his schedule allowed because someone had once given him patience when he needed it most. Before leaving, he looked around the modest classroom and remarked that places like this quietly changed the future far more than many expensive boardrooms ever could. Claire appreciated the comment, never imagining that the reserved volunteer she had just met carried influence that reached far beyond anything Ryan had spent years chasing. As Nathaniel walked toward the exit, the center's director hurried after him with unmistakable respect, but Claire had already turned back to helping another student, unaware that fate had begun placing the first invisible pieces of a story neither she nor Ryan could possibly foresee. Over the next several months, Nathaniel became a familiar face at the literacy center, although no one seemed to know very much about him. He never arrived with an assistant, never mentioned his profession, and never acted as though his time was more valuable than anyone else's. Some afternoons, he helped children solve math problems. Other days, he quietly repaired broken bookshelves or organized donated supplies before leaving without expecting recognition. Claire admired that quiet generosity because it reminded her that genuine character rarely demanded attention. Their conversations remained simple at first. They talked about favorite novels, childhood memories, and the neighborhoods that shaped them. Nathaniel listened far more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions that made Claire feel heard for the first time in years. He never asked uncomfortable questions about her divorce, yet somehow seemed to understand that she carried invisible disappointments. One evening after the center closed, heavy rain began falling across the city. Claire stood beneath the entrance awning, realizing she had forgotten her umbrella. Nathaniel happened to be locking the storage room and offered to drive her home before the weather became worse. During the short drive through quiet Chicago streets, they spoke about success. Nathaniel asked what the word meant to her. Claire looked through the rain-covered window before answering that success was waking up without pretending to be someone else. Nathaniel smiled with quiet approval and admitted that many people spent entire careers chasing wealth while never discovering that kind of freedom. His answer stayed with Claire long after she stepped out of the car. Days later, the literacy center received unexpected news. An anonymous donor had provided enough funding to renovate classrooms, purchase new computers, and expand free educational programs for hundreds of families. Staff members celebrated the miracle, but no one could identify the generous benefactor. Claire noticed only one unusual detail. On the morning construction began, Nathaniel quietly congratulated the director before disappearing without attending the public announcement. She found the timing curious, but never asked questions. Meanwhile, Ryan's career entered its most ambitious chapter. His company competed for a landmark redevelopment project that promised national recognition and extraordinary financial rewards. Every executive in the industry knew that winning the contract would permanently elevate the firm's reputation. Ryan devoted nearly every waking hour to preparing presentations, building relationships, and earning the trust of the mysterious investment group leading the project. Rumors spread that the final decision rested with a respected businessman whose appearances were rare and whose recommendations shaped billion-dollar investments across the country. No photographs accompanied the articles. No interviews revealed his daily life. His name circulated almost like a legend among executives determined to earn his confidence. Ryan often spoke about this influential figure with admiration, convinced that one successful meeting could redefine his future. At the same time, Claire's own life continued changing in quieter ways. She accepted a position coordinating community outreach programs for the Literacy Center, helping secure partnerships with local schools and nonprofit organizations. Her confidence slowly returned, not because she possessed more money than before, but because she no longer measured her value through someone else's approval. She laughed more often. She slept peacefully. She rediscovered the simple joy of believing that kindness was never wasted. One Friday afternoon, the center's director approached Claire carrying an elegant cream-colored envelope embossed with a silver crest she had never seen before. The director explained that the invitation had arrived specifically requesting Claire's presence at one of Chicago's most prestigious charity galas, an event attended by philanthropists, business leaders, and influential community figures every year. Claire stared at the invitation in confusion. She knew no one who belonged in that world anymore. Before she could ask another question, Nathaniel walked into the lobby carrying a stack of donated books. He noticed the invitation in her hands, smiled almost imperceptibly, and said, "Sometimes life has a remarkable way of introducing people to the room they were always meant to enter." Claire thought he was simply offering encouragement. She had no idea that nearly everyone attending that gala would recognize Nathaniel long before they recognized her. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as Chicago's most influential business leaders, philanthropists, and public officials gathered for the annual Legacy Foundation Gala. Conversations drifted across the room like carefully rehearsed performances, each one filled with promises, partnerships, and polished smiles. Ryan Carter stood near the center of it all, wearing the confidence of a man convinced that the evening belonged to him. Months of preparation had led to this event. Every introduction, every dinner, every presentation had been carefully planned with one goal in mind. He intended to earn the trust of the mysterious investor whose endorsement would transform both his company and his future. Vanessa Brooks remained at his side, greeting guests with effortless charm while quietly reminding Ryan of important names and titles. Several executives congratulated him in advance, convinced he would soon become the newest rising star in the city's development industry. Ryan accepted every compliment with practiced humility, although inwardly he had already begun imagining the headlines that would follow. Across the ballroom, Claire stepped through the entrance wearing a timeless navy blue evening gown that reflected elegance without extravagance. She wore no expensive jewelry beyond a simple pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. Her confidence came not from designer labels, but from the quiet peace she had rebuilt over the past year. For a brief moment she considered turning around and leaving. This world had once represented painful memories, and she wondered whether returning had been a mistake. Before uncertainty could take hold, Nathaniel approached beside her, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that somehow matched his understated personality. He smiled warmly and assured her there was nothing to fear. Claire thanked him for encouraging her to attend, still believing he had received an invitation through charitable work like many other volunteers. Together they walked into the ballroom without attracting much attention at first. Ryan noticed Claire almost immediately. Surprise flashed across his face before fading into amusement. He excused himself from a conversation with several investors and confidently crossed the room, eager to demonstrate how completely he had moved beyond his former marriage. Vanessa followed a few steps behind, curious to meet the woman she had heard about but never truly known. Ryan stopped directly in front of Claire with a smile that carried more pride than kindness. He slowly looked her up and down before commenting loudly enough for nearby guests to hear that it was nice to see she had finally managed to afford a respectable dress. A few uncomfortable laughs echoed around them. Ryan continued by remarking that charity events often inspired generous invitations, suggesting that perhaps someone had mistaken Claire for a donor instead of a guest. Several people exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. Claire did neither. She simply looked at Ryan with the same calm expression she had worn throughout their marriage whenever anger threatened to replace dignity. That composure unsettled him more than any argument could have. Expecting a reaction, he took another step closer and remarked that success clearly had not found everyone after the divorce, but at least she still knew how to make an appearance. Claire answered gently that success looked different depending on what someone valued. Ryan smiled dismissively, believing he had won the exchange. Then he noticed something unusual. Around the ballroom, conversations were beginning to fade. Influential executives who had ignored nearly everyone else throughout the evening suddenly straightened their posture. Several board members quietly stepped aside. Members of the event staff discreetly opened a clear path through the crowd. Ryan felt excitement growing inside him. The distinguished guest everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. Certain that his opportunity had come, he adjusted his jacket and turned toward the entrance, ready to introduce himself. Instead, he watched in stunned silence as the respected gentleman walked directly past every executive, every investor, and every public official without stopping. The entire ballroom followed the man's movement until he reached Claire. Nathaniel smiled with genuine warmth, accepted a quiet greeting from her, and then, in full view of everyone present, addressed her with unmistakable affection before turning toward the silent crowd. In that single moment, Ryan realized that the quiet volunteer he had never bothered to notice was the very man whose respect he had spent months desperately trying to earn. The silence inside the ballroom became almost impossible to ignore. Ryan stood frozen as Nathaniel Sterling calmly turned toward the gathering of executives who had spent the last several months hoping for nothing more than a few minutes of his attention. There was no need for an introduction. Every influential guest already knew exactly who he was. Nathaniel was the founder and chairman of Sterling Holdings, the investment group whose decisions had shaped skylines across the country for more than 2 decades. His reputation had never been built on dramatic speeches or public appearances. It had been built on quiet judgment, long-term vision, and one unwavering principle. He invested in people before he invested in projects. Ryan suddenly understood why every conversation had stopped the moment Nathaniel entered the room. He also understood something far more unsettling. The woman he had just mocked was standing beside the only person whose opinion truly mattered that evening. Nathaniel smiled politely at the event host before looking back at Claire. His voice remained calm, warm, and sincere. He thanked her publicly for everything she had done for the Literacy Center over the past year, explaining that hundreds of children now had opportunities they never would have received without her leadership and compassion. Several guests looked toward Claire with genuine surprise. Until that moment, many had assumed she was simply another attendee. They had no idea she had become one of the driving forces behind a community program Nathaniel personally supported. Claire looked slightly embarrassed by the unexpected attention and quietly replied that many volunteers deserved the same recognition. Nathaniel nodded with obvious respect before saying that true character often revealed itself in people who never asked to be noticed. His words echoed through the ballroom with far greater impact than any prepared speech delivered earlier that evening. Ryan felt every sentence land heavier than the last. For years he had measured success through titles, wealth, and influence. Nathaniel was describing success using entirely different standards, and every example pointed directly toward Claire instead of him. One of Ryan's business partners cautiously stepped closer and asked whether Claire and Nathaniel had worked together for a long time. Nathaniel answered that they had first met while volunteering, adding that Claire had never once mentioned her previous life, her personal hardships, or the sacrifices she had made. She had simply shown up every week to help complete strangers build better futures. Several nonprofit directors nearby immediately joined the conversation, praising Claire's dedication and kindness. One woman explained that Claire often stayed long after everyone else left to prepare lesson plans for children who struggled in school. Another quietly mentioned that Claire had personally organized fundraising efforts without ever putting her own name on the events. Ryan listened in disbelief. While he had spent the past year chasing recognition, Claire had quietly earned admiration from people who valued integrity more than status. Nathaniel then turned his attention toward Ryan with the same composed expression he had maintained all evening. There was no anger in his face, only quiet disappointment. He remarked that successful organizations could always recover from financial mistakes, but they rarely recovered from failures of character. He explained that every investment reflected the values of the people behind it, and respect could never be separated from leadership. The ballroom remained completely silent. Ryan wanted to defend himself, to explain that the comments had been harmless jokes, but the words never came. Even he no longer believed them. Vanessa lowered her eyes, visibly uncomfortable as she replayed the conversation that everyone in the room had just witnessed. Several executives who had enthusiastically congratulated Ryan earlier now slowly drifted toward other conversations, unwilling to remain associated with someone who had displayed such poor judgment in front of the one man they all respected. The opportunity Ryan had spent months pursuing disappeared without a dramatic announcement. No contracts were torn apart. No public insults followed. There was only the unmistakable realization that trust had quietly left the room. Nathaniel thanked Claire once again for accepting the invitation before asking whether she would join him at the foundation's table to meet several educators and community leaders whose work she had inspired. Claire accepted with a gracious smile. As they walked away together, people stepped aside not because of wealth alone, but because genuine respect naturally followed those who had earned it. Ryan remained exactly where he was, surrounded by the success he had spent years building, yet feeling more alone than he had ever imagined possible. Several weeks passed after the gala, but the memory of that evening refused to fade. Newspapers never reported the brief exchange between Ryan and Claire because nothing dramatic had happened in the traditional sense. There had been no shouting, no public scandal, and no spectacular confrontation. Yet within the business community, people quietly remembered what they had witnessed. They remembered the difference between influence that demanded attention and character that naturally earned respect. Ryan discovered that opportunities did not disappear overnight. They simply stopped arriving. Meetings that once filled his calendar were politely postponed. Phone calls became shorter. Invitations became less frequent. No one openly criticized him, but something had changed. The confidence he had built upon status alone had begun to crack. For the first time in many years, Ryan started asking himself questions he had avoided for far too long. He replayed old memories that he had once dismissed as unimportant. He remembered Claire bringing homemade soup to his office after hearing he had been working late. He remembered her patiently encouraging him before every difficult presentation. He remembered the countless evenings she celebrated his victories while quietly setting aside her own dreams. Looking back, he realized she had never asked him to become someone different. She had only hoped he would remain the man she first married. One quiet afternoon, Ryan visited the literacy center after learning that Claire still volunteered there. The building was filled with children's laughter, colorful artwork, and shelves overflowing with donated books. Through the glass window of a classroom, he watched Claire helping a young student sound out difficult words with endless patience and encouragement. The child finally finished reading an entire page without hesitation, and the smile on that little face carried more genuine joy than any award ceremony Ryan had attended in years. Claire noticed him standing in the hallway and walked over with the same calm expression she had worn at the gala. Ryan lowered his eyes before speaking. He admitted that he had spent years believing success meant being admired by powerful people. Only after losing what mattered most had he begun to understand that respect could never be demanded. It had to be deserved. He offered a sincere apology, not expecting forgiveness, but believing she deserved to hear the words he should have spoken long ago. Claire listened quietly before thanking him for the apology. She said that carrying resentment only made old wounds heavier, and she had chosen long ago to stop carrying them. Forgiveness, she explained, did not mean returning to the past. It meant refusing to let the past decide the future. Ryan nodded slowly because, for the first time, he truly understood the difference. There was no dramatic reunion, no promise of another chance, and no attempt to rewrite history. Some chapters were meant to teach rather than repeat. As Ryan walked toward the parking lot, he passed Nathaniel, who had just arrived with another donation of books for the children. Nathaniel greeted him politely, and Ryan returned the greeting with genuine humility. Nothing more needed to be said. Claire remained inside the classroom, laughing with students who had no idea how much her own life had changed. She no longer measured herself by someone else's approval, and that freedom had become her greatest success. Months later, the Literacy Center opened a new learning wing funded through charitable partnerships that Claire had helped build. A small plaque near the entrance recognized dozens of volunteers instead of a single donor because Claire believed every act of kindness deserved to be remembered. Standing nearby during the opening celebration, Nathaniel quietly remarked that buildings could educate minds, but compassion transformed lives. Claire smiled, looking around at the families filling the hall with hope, and realized that losing the life she once feared leaving behind had allowed her to discover the life she was always meant to live. Sometimes the greatest victory is not proving someone wrong. It is finally proving to yourself that your worth was never theirs to define.